For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Morning.
Do you believe Women's Month is becoming a rather empty ritual, with it being commemorated by so many different organizations such as governments and gender activists, and also by commercial enterprises?
I think that we can invest such a month with meaning if we think about it. I think it's very important that the way we relate to gender issues today is very different in post-apartheid South Africa, because when the question of women's rights was raised before 1994, and especially before the new constitution of 1996, it was an aspiration, it was a claim, but it had no basis in law. Now, the conditions under which gender equality is raised in the present is something very different, because people claim on the basis of rights that are enshrined in the Constitution and other legislation. It is true that we may argue, and I would argue, that gender equality has not been adequately advanced or safeguarded, but the basis on which we can argue it is not merely morality, it's not merely understanding of the concept of gender, it's not merely because one is a feminist, it is also because the law of the land demands that there be gender equality. Consequently, we have a basis which is different from before. Unfortunately, I think there have been important advances, but there have also been setbacks. I think it's important when we look at gender that we understand that Women's Month is called into being not purely because of women, but because of a relationship between men and women, which we call patriarchy. And patriarchal relationship, patriarchy literally means rule by men, rule of men over the family, and I would understand it to be power of men in a range of institutions which are constructed to serve the interests of men and not to take account of the needs of women. For example, we now say that we must measure gender equality, and the way in which gender equality tends to be measured is how many women there are in this institution or that institution, or in the universities or in parliament. And we need also, and I'm not the first person to say this, to ask, are the institutions into which women are now entering, are they friendly to women? Now, it is desirable, in my view, that household duties should be shared between men and women. But in practice, we know that it is very rare for them to be shared. And childcare, childbearing, childcare, all of these things are seen primarily as the tasks of women. And if you look at most institutions, most professions, they expect the practitioner, whether it's a lawyer, a legal practitioner, an advocate especially, many others, they expect them to be available at all hours. Now, if the woman, the female partner, is the main nurturer, which is in fact the case, even if she can afford to employ a domestic worker, that has to be overseen. As the children grow older, They may have to be taken to sports meetings or drama classes or whatever it happens to be. And in 99% of the cases, I would imagine that it is the woman who's doing this. At this moment, Parliament is meeting till late. And how does this impact on women participating as equals in Parliament's activities? Who is preparing the meals at home? Who is seeing that the homework is being done? Who is looking after these various things? And we have to ask ourselves, when the times of meetings are arranged, are they enabling or disabling for the participation of women? So when we talk of Women's Month, we must put patriarchy, unpacking the meanings and the tentacles of patriarchy in the forefront, and working out ways of addressing this legally, politically, and socially.
Can the Constitution itself, though, not be interpreted in a way that entrenches patriarchy?
Well, there are some parts of the Constitution that raise difficult questions. The recognition of traditional leaders, for example, and their reliance on what is their version of customary law sometimes stands antagonistically to the rights of women, gender equality, the way it's presented. We've seen in the Traditional Courts Bill and a range of other legislation that has re-empowered chiefs, that it tends to stand in an adverse relationship to the emancipation of women. Now, some people answer this by saying, when it comes to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights always trumps custom. Now, I don't think that's a very good answer, because one must understand the Constitution as not one where we try to create hierarchies of rights. Now, what we've got to work towards is a way of acknowledging custom, that some people do want to follow custom, but interrogating the meanings of custom and arguing for a notion of living custom. In South Africa, the custom that was historically followed, that is recorded by famous anthropologists and scholars like Monica Wilson, Jack Simons and others, is a living custom. It's a custom where women had more rights than under what was called native law or Bantu law under the apartheid regime, and is the law that some of these chiefs want to apply today. We must remember also, when we consider the type of tension that we're facing between women's rights and what is called custom, that many of the chiefs under the apartheid regime were collaborating with the apartheid regime. In 1987, Contralesa was formed, and chiefs claimed the right to be part of the tradition of resistance to conquest. Now, it is true that chiefs were in the forefront, did lead resistance to conquest. But what happened in the years that followed is that gradually chiefs became in the employ of the Native Administration Department, later called Bantu Administration and Black Administration, and not all, but most of them did collaborate. Those who didn't were deposed. So we saw a situation where they became an integral part of the administration of separate development, so-called, where separate Bantustans were created, denationalization of Africans, and there was a reign of terror that many of these chiefs exercised. some of these chiefs are still in good standing today. So when we examine the type of repositories they are of custom, we need to interrogate that. We need to interrogate whether chiefs, as they claim, are actually the repositories of custom. Because my understanding is custom is not decided hierarchically. It is something where learned people at all levels of society contribute. And it's been hierarchically interpreted by chiefs. So to come back to the question about the Constitution, what there needs to be is not a reversal of what chiefs are saying and saying custom is just trumped by the Bill of Rights, which says there must be gender equality. What we have got to do is engage and contest meanings and come up with meanings that reconciles the interaction between custom, between traditional leaders, and the rights to gender equality of men and women.
You've mentioned that Parliament at the moment is running quite late, with meetings late into the evening, and you've questioned who is taking care of the children, for instance. Is it not a choice of those women to be in that situation?
My answer is that we are trying to build a society where if you are elected to a position and you've accepted the choice that you have been chosen by your organization, you shouldn't therefore be penalized for that. What we've got to build into the choices that these women are now able to make in a parliament which promotes, especially ANC should be congratulated for the number of women it puts in parliament, but when they are put in parliament, parliament must be enabling. I mean, we can say they've made the choice and they are paying a price because the men are not sharing in the responsibilities. And so there's a number of ways where we have to examine how, when you are rewarded, you are not simultaneously penalized. You are rewarded in the sense that you are asked to play a role in building this country and its laws. Now, when we say that to men, we don't penalize them. Now, women are penalized, and it's the problem remains one of patriarchy, which needs to be unpacked. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking about South Africa's political scene.